Unit 2, Developmental Psychology. Presentation 2, Explanations of Attachment, Bowlby's Theory.
Bowlby's theory of attachment has become the dominant theory of attachment. John Bowlby first formulated this theory in the 1950s and published it formally in 1969.
Explaining attachment using Bowlby's theory.
The first key principle of the theory is that attachment is seen as an adaptive behaviour because it promotes survival and reproduction.
Bowlby proposed that attachment behaviour evolved because it performs an important survival function. Individuals who display attachment behaviour are more likely to survive and reproduce, and this means the behaviour is perpetuated in subsequent generations. Over many thousands of years, the genes that promote survival behaviour become widespread.
The second key principle is the notion of a sensitive period. Bowlby proposed that attachments could only form during a particular window in development, between the age of about 3 to 6 months. It might still be possible to form attachments outside this window, but becomes increasingly more difficult. The third key principle of Bowlby's theory is that attachment is a two-way process. Attachment is not just about an infant being attached to its mother, but, in order to complete the bond, the mother must also form an attachment to the infant. Bowlby proposed that infants have evolved certain characteristics that assist this process. He called these characteristics social releases.
Social releases are behaviours such as crying or smiling or simply looking cute in the way that young animals often do. Social releaser elicits caregiving from adults.
The fourth key principle is the concept of monotropy and the internal working model. Infants form one special emotional bond. This special bond is described as having monotropy. Monotropy means leaning towards one person. This one person is referred to as the infant's primary attachment figure. A mother is the person who is offering a special kind of care, and this is where the internal working model comes in. Bowlby proposed that the individual who offers a special kind of sensitive responsiveness to the infant becomes their primary attachment figure. This term, sensitive responsiveness, refers to the willingness of a caregiver to respond to an infant's cries for attention and company. The relationship with this primary attachment figure has emotional significance for the child's development. This relationship creates an internal working model about relationships, which will affect the rest of that child's life. We have internal working models for all sorts of things in our lives. They provide expectations of what things are like in the world. For example, you have an internal working model of what a school is like, and this model generates expectations that guide your behaviour. A person's internal working model about relationships generates expectations about how people are likely to behave in relationships. For example, having an expectation that people are selfish or unselfish when in love, or that people are generally reliable or not.
This leads us to the fifth key principle in Bowlby's theory, the continuity hypothesis. The concept of the internal working model should mean that infants who have a close emotional relationship with their mother figure go on to expect that relationships later in life will be the same. Close attachments with the mother figure are referred to as secure attachments. Children who are securely attached to their mother figure in infancy would expect to have similar positive, close relationships later in life. The opposite would be true of an infant who experiences a difficult early relationship with the mother figure and who would then expect all future relationships to be like this.
The final principle to mention is the concept of secondary attachments. Bowlby envisaged that an infant's attachments formed a kind of pyramid, with the primary attachment figure at the top and the other attachments lower down. The other attachments are the secondary attachment figures, such as fathers and grandparents and siblings.
Does this mean that fathers and grandparents are less important?
Perhaps less important is the wrong description because they are important, but as a kind of alternative care. Bowlby suggested we all have a number of secondary attachment figures and they perform an important backup function. But, according to Bowlby, the primary attachment figure is especially important in a child's emotional development because that person generates their internal working model of relationships.
We'll now turn to evaluating Bowlby's theory and begin by looking at the research evidence that supports it.
First of all, support for the idea that attachment has evolved comes from research showing that attachment is a universal behaviour. If attachment behaviours are inherited, then we would expect to see the same behaviours in people all over the world, regardless of their cultural experiences. One example of such support comes from a study by Edward Tronick and colleagues, who observed families in Zaire in Central Africa. In the tribal group called the Efa, infants are cared for and even breastfed by different women. Despite such different child-rearing practices as compared with those in the UK and America, at 6 months these infants still showed just one primary attachment. Support for the importance of attachment as a two-way process comes from Harlow's study of rhesus monkeys. The monkeys were taken away from their real mothers and raised with artificial wire mothers, one that had a feeding bottle attached and one covered in soft cloth. The monkeys preferred the wire mother offering contact comfort, but this so-called mother was unresponsive. Attachment was a one-way transaction, and these infants developed into emotionally maladjusted adults. This underlines the importance of interaction in attachment and healthy emotional development.
Support for Bowlby's concept of monotropy comes from Rudolf Schaffer and Peggy Emerson's observational study of infants in Glasgow. They found that the infants formed many attachments, but there was still one primary object of attachment, which was most often, but not always, the infant's mother. Finally, there is research support for the continuity hypothesis. The Minnesota longitudinal study followed children from infancy through to later childhood. One of the findings was that those children who had been classed as securely attached when they were infants were later rated highest for social competence. They were also rated as being more popular and also more able to understand other people's feelings. This suggests a positive correlation between early attachment experiences and later social and emotional adjustment.
However, there are also some limitations to Bowlby's theory. The concept of monotropy is not accepted by everyone. For example, Michael Rutter argued that all attachment figures are equally important, and Bowlby was wrong to single out one relationship as especially significant. It is also not clear whether only one primary attachment is necessary for healthy emotional development or whether several might be preferable.
A second important weakness is that Bowlby's theory places great emphasis on the mother's sensitive responsiveness. The quality of infant-mother attachment, according to Bowlby, is solely determined by the mother's behaviour. However, an alternative theory has been proposed by Jerome Kagan. He has suggested that the infant's innate temperament affects the way attachments develop. Some infants are born with an easy temperament, whereas others are born with a more difficult temperament. Mothers will find it easier to respond sensitively to an easygoing baby, and thus a secure attachment is likely to be formed. In contrast, they will find it harder to form a secure attachment with a more difficult baby. Therefore, the infant's temperament also influences the quality of the attachment bond. It's not just caused by the mother's behaviour.
What can we conclude? Bowlby's approach to attachment has received considerable research support and continues to be the preferred explanation. However, Subsequent refinements, such as the temperament hypothesis, make a useful contribution to our understanding of psychology.